What happens when a prediction fails? When an astrologer confidently predicts an election result, a market crash, a war, a natural disaster, or a major turning point in someone's life, and the event simply does not happen. Do we blame the birth time? Do we blame the astrologer? Do we search for another planetary combination to explain away the failure? Or do we have the courage to ask a much more uncomfortable question? Was the method itself wrong? For centuries, astrology has been celebrated when predictions succeed. Successful forecasts are remembered, repeated, and sometimes presented as evidence of astrology's extraordinary predictive power. But failed predictions deserve equal attention, because a discipline cannot become stronger by studying only its successes. It must investigate its failures. And perhaps this is where the real scientific journey of astrology begins. Not when we ask, how often were we right? But when we are prepared to ask, why were we wrong? In this episode, we will not ridicule failed predictions. We will study them. We will examine uncertainty, interpretation, timing, conflicting planetary influences, human judgment, confirmation bias, and the fundamental limitations of attempting to predict complex events. Because every failed prediction contains information, contains data. Every mistake contains a lesson, and every unanswered question gives us another opportunity to investigate. Welcome to When Predictions Fail, What Can We Learn? From Astrology by Arun Tiwari. Today, we examine not astrology's victories, but one of the most important tests. Astrology has been used for centuries, not only to interpret individual lives, but also to anticipate the destiny of nations. This branch of astrology is generally known as Mundane astrology. Its practitioners have attempted to interpret wars, revolutions, political transitions, economic crises, natural disasters, and the rise and fall of governments through planetary cycles and national horoscopes. But this raises an unavoidable question. How successful has astrology actually been when asked to predict major world events before they happened. The historical record presents a complicated picture. Astrologers can point to occasions when planetary configurations appeared to correspond remarkably with periods of political upheaval, economic transformation, or social change. But correspondence observed after an event is not the same thing as a specific prediction made before the event. That distinction is extremely important. If astrology is to be examined seriously as a predictive discipline, a forecast should ideally be documented in advance, sufficiently specific to be evaluated and judged by the same standards, whether it succeeds or fails. And this is where the subject becomes uncomfortable. World War II, a major test. One of the most important examples comes from the 20th century. The French astrologer Henri Barbault, who became one of the prominent figures in 20th century mundane astrology, later discussed the difficulty astrology faced surrounding the Second World War. The important question is not whether astrologers subsequently found planetary configurations that could be associated with the war. They certainly did. The more difficult question is, how clearly was the approaching catastrophe identified beforehand? World War II, a major test, again in perfect accuracy. Perhaps it will be built by astrologers who are willing to test, document, question, refine, and learn. Study deeply, predict responsibly, and never stop learning. Specific public predictions about future events that did not occur. That includes astrology, psychics, prophets, and other certainty-based forecasts. It avoids singling out one field and reinforces your central ethical message. Certainty about the future should be approached with humility. Throughout this journey, we have examined predictions that failed. But perhaps failure is not the end of the investigation. Perhaps it is where investigation begins. A prediction that succeeds may strengthen our confidence, but a prediction that fails forces us to examine our assumptions. Was the astronomical data correct? Was the horoscope reliable? Were the planetary combinations interpreted consistently? Was the timing technique appropriate? Were contradictory indicators ignored? Did the astrologer see what the chart actually indicated, or what the astrologer expected to see? And when attempt to predict wars, elections, financial markets, earthquakes, or the destiny of nations? Are we sometimes asking astrology to provide a degree of certainty that no predictive system can reasonably provide? These are difficult questions, but serious research requires difficult questions. Astrology does not become weaker when we acknowledge uncertainty. The millennium and the apocalyptic predictions. The approach of the year 2000 produced another wave of predictions. Astrology, numerology, interpretations of Nostradamus, technological anxiety surrounding Y2K, and various apocalyptic traditions became mixed together in popular culture. Predictions of catastrophic global transformation circulated widely. Yet, January 1st, 2000 arrived. The feared worldwide collapse did not occur. Importantly, however, we must distinguish between astrology itself and predictions derived from Nostradamus, numerology, religious prophecy, or popular sensationalism. Combining them indiscriminately would itself be poor research. Elections, the modern laboratory. Modern elections provide perhaps an even better test. Before major elections, astrologers frequently publish competing predictions. One astrologer predicts candidate A, another predicts candidate B. After the election, successful predictions circulate widely. The unsuccessful ones often disappear and are forgotten. This creates a serious methodological problem known as selection bias. If we remember the successes but forget the failures, almost any predictive system can appear more accurate than it really is. There is another danger: retrospective explanation. After an incorrect prediction, it is always possible to return to the horoscope and discover another planetary factor that supposedly explains why the original forecast failed. Perhaps Saturn overpowered Jupiter. Perhaps Rahu altered the outcome. Perhaps a retrograde planet was underestimated. Perhaps the national horoscope was incorrect. Perhaps another divisional chart should have been considered. Some of these explanations may be legitimate astrological hypotheses, but scientifically, they create a problem. When does an explanation become an explanation? And when does it become an excuse? The scientific challenge. Astrology has also been subjected to controlled experimental testing. One frequently discussed example is physicist Sean Carlson's double-blind experiment, published in the magazine Nature in 1985. The experiment investigated whether astrologers could successfully match natal charts with personality information under controlled conditions. The reported results did not demonstrate performance beyond what would be expected by chance. The study itself has subsequently generated debate over methodology and interpretation. But regardless of one's position on that particular experiment, it raises an important principle. If astrology makes testable claims, those claims should be capable of being tested. And failed tests should not automatically be dismissed simply because their conclusions were uncomfortable. Neither should one experiment automatically be treated as the final verdict on an enormous and diverse astrological tradition. Both positions would be intellectually simplistic. The real question, and therefore our investigations should not begin with the statement, astrology works, nor should it begin with, astrology does not work. Those are conclusions. Research must begin somewhere else with a question. Under what circumstances does an astrological prediction succeed? Under what circumstances does it fail? And most importantly, can we identify the difference between the event occurs? Because if astrology is ever to move from interpretation toward a genuinely testable predictive methodology, this may be one of the most important questions it has to answer. So now, let us examine some predictions that did not come true. Not to ridicule the astrologers who made them, not to discredit an ancient tradition, but to discover something potentially far more valuable. What can failure teach us? Imagine spending hours analyzing a horoscope, examining planetary positions, checking divisional charts, reviewing periods or dashas, studying transits. Everything points toward one conclusion. You make your prediction. You feel confident, certain, and even. And then nothing happens. Or worse, the exact opposite happens. At that moment, every astrologer feels the same uncomfortable question. Was I wrong? Today, I want to discuss something most astrologers avoid: prediction failures. Not because it is embarrassing, but because it may be one of the greatest teachers on the astrological path. When predictions fail, what can we learn? This is our topic for this episode. What happens when an astrological prediction fails? Does it mean astrology has failed? Does it mean the astrologer was wrong? Or could it mean that we have misunderstood what astrology is actually capable of telling us? Every astrologer, whether a beginner or someone with decades of experience, will eventually face a prediction that does not unfold exactly as expected. And perhaps the most important question is not why was the prediction wrong? The more important question is what can we learn from it? The predictions, lessons learned. Every prediction carries with it a moment of truth. A date arrives, an election is held, a market rises or falls, a war begins, or the expected war never comes. And suddenly, what was once a prediction becomes something far more valuable: evidence. When a prediction succeeds, we celebrate it. But when a prediction fails, we must study it. Because failure asks questions that success sometimes allows us to avoid. What did we miss? Was the planetary configuration interpreted too literally? Did we give excessive importance to one transit while ignoring the larger planetary picture? Was the birth time inaccurate? Was the national horoscope itself questionable? Did we correctly understand the periods, the dasha, the nakshatra constellations, the houses in the horoscope, the dispositor and the strength of the planets involved? Or did expectation quietly influence interpretation? These are uncomfortable questions. But serious astrology must be willing to ask them. A failed prediction does not automatically prove that every principle of astrology is wrong. But neither should an astrologer hide behind explanations after the event. If astrology wishes to be taken seriously, its failures deserve the same attention as its successes. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. Predictions should never become a performance of certainty. Astrology deals with tendencies, cycles, timing, probabilities, and the interaction of many variables. Human affairs are enormously complex. Political decisions, economics, technology, individual choices, unexpected events, and collective behavior all interact with one another. Therefore, humility must remain at the heart of prediction. Instead of saying, "This will certainly happen," perhaps the responsible astrologer should sometimes say, "The planetary configuration suggests an elevated probability of this outcome, and here are the conditions that could strengthen or weaken it. That small change transforms prediction into analysis. And when the prediction fails, we return to the chart, not to manufacture an excuse, but to learn. We document what we predicted. We document what actually happened. We identify the assumptions that failed, and then we refine the method. Because a genuine researcher does not erase failure from the record. A genuine researcher learns from it. Perhaps the future of astrology will not be built by astrologers who claim to be right every time. Perhaps it will be built by those courageous enough to ask, when we were wrong, why were we wrong? And if we can answer that question honestly, every failed prediction becomes more than a mistake. It becomes a lesson, a case study, a correction, and ultimately another step in our search for truth. It becomes a data. Here are some of the major astrological predictions that failed. Please take a look at them, and you'll get a brief glimpse of what was predicted and what happened. Astrology is not a certainty machine. Let us begin with a fundamental principle. Astrology should not be presented as a machine that produces guaranteed outcomes. A birth chart contains many layers. The ascendant or lagna, the moon, the planets, the different 12 houses, the nakshatras, constellations, the periods, the transits, the various divisional charts, planetary strength, yogas or combinations, aspects of planets, and many other factors. The astrologer's responsibility is to interpret how these factors interact. But interpretation is not the same as certainty. Suppose an astrologer sees a powerful career period. Planet Jupiter may be supporting the 10th house. The period may activate professional opportunities. Planet Saturn may indicate increased responsibility. The astrologer therefore predicts this is a strong period for career advancement. But does that necessarily mean you'll receive a promotion on a particular date? No. These are two very different statements. One describes a favorable astrological environment, and the other claims a guaranteed event. And that distinction is extremely important. Timing may be right, but the event may be wrong. One of the most common errors in predictive astrology is confusing timing with manifestation. Imagine that the horoscope shows a major activation of the 10th house. The 10th house represents career, status, authority, and public responsibilities. An astrologer might predict a promotion, but instead, the person resigns from their job and starts a business. Was the astrology wrong? Perhaps not. The underlying astrological symbolism, a major transformation in professional life, may have been correct. The interpretation was simply too narrow. This teaches us an important lesson. Planets often describe themes more reliably than specific events. Saturn can represent responsibility, discipline, delay, restrictions. Jupiter can represent expansion, opportunity, wisdom, or growth. Mars can represent action, competition, conflict, or courage. The planetary symbolism may manifest differently depending upon the individual's circumstances. Therefore, good prediction requires not only knowledge of astrology, it also requires accurate judgment. Never read one planet in isolation. Another major source of failed predictions is relying too heavily on one transit. We often hear statements such as, Jupiter is entering your second house. Therefore, you will become wealthy. Or, Saturn is entering your seventh house. Therefore, your marriage will face difficulties. This is an oversimplification. A transit is only one layer of the horoscope. In Vedic astrology, we must examine several factors together. We should ask, what is the major period, Mahadasa? What is the sub-period, Antardasa? Which house do those planets rule? What is their natal strength? Which nakshatra or constellation is being activated? What does the relevant divisional chart indicate? What other transits are occurring simultaneously? Prediction becomes stronger when multiple independent indicators point toward the same conclusion. This is what I call the principle of convergence. One indicator suggests a possibility. Two indicators strengthen the possibility. Several independent indicators pointing towards the same theme create a much stronger predictive case. The importance of period and transit. In Vedic astrology, dasas or periods and transits or gochar should not normally be interpreted independently. Think of the period as the chapter of life currently being written. Think of the transit as the environment in which that chapter unfolds. A powerful Jupiter transit may promise expansion, but if the operating period does not activate the relevant houses or planets, the result may be much weaker than expected. Similarly, a challenging Saturn transit does not automatically mean disaster. If the period is supportive and the natal Saturn is strong, the same transit could produce discipline, responsibility, and long-term achievement. This is why dramatic predictions based only on Saturn enters this sign or Jupiter aspects this house should be treated cautiously. The entire birth chart must speak the nakshatra layer or the layer of constellation. There is another dimension that deserves far more attention: the nakshatras. Two planets may occupy the same zodiac sign, but operate through completely different nakshatras, and therefore their results may differ substantially. The nakshatra lord introduces another planetary influence into the interpretation. This can modify the timing, quality, and expression of an event. For serious predictions, therefore, we should not stop at the sign. We should ask, which nakshatra, which step or pada, who rules the nakshatra, where is the lord of the nakshatra positioned? This additional layer can sometimes explain why apparently obvious predictions fail. Now let's come to birth time accuracy. There is also a very practical reason why predictions sometimes fail. The birth time may be wrong. A difference of several minutes can sometimes change the ascendant degree significantly. It can alter divisional charts. It can change sensitive cusps. And in some cases, it can influence predictive timing. People frequently provide birth times such as approximately 7:30 a.m. or 7:30 p.m. Some would say, my mother remembers it was around sunrise. The hospital record says 8 a.m. or 8 p.m. These may be useful starting points, but they are not necessarily precise astronomical data. Before making highly specific predictions, especially predictions based heavily on divisional charts, Birth time accuracy should therefore be considered. And this is where birth time rectification can become important. Let us discuss human choice and environment. Now we arrive at one of the most important philosophical questions in astrology. What about human choice? Suppose astrology indicates a favorable period for education. One person studies intensely, another person does nothing. Should we expect identical outcomes? Of course not. A favorable period may provide opportunity, but opportunity still requires your participation, your hard work. Similarly, someone's career potential may be excellent, but economic recession, illness, family responsibilities, immigration restrictions, or geopolitical events may change how that potential manifests. Astrology operates within life. It does not operate outside reality. This is why responsible astrologers should speak about probability, potential, and timing rather than absolute certainty. Why mundane predictions are even more difficult? Predicting world events is even more complicated. When predicting the future of a country, economy, or financial market, an astrologer may need to examine national horoscopes, planetary ingress charts, eclipses, major conjunctions of planets, economic cycles, and historical planetary patterns. And there is another problem. For many countries, astrologers disagree about the correct national horoscope. Should India's chart begin at independence, at midnight, or at the establishment of the Republic? Which chart should represent a modern Germany, Russia, China, or United States? These are legitimate research questions. Therefore, mundane astrology should be approached as a field of continuous historical research, not sensational certainty. The danger of retrofitting. There's another mistake we must guard against. After an event occurs, it is usually possible to find some astrological configuration that appears to explain it. But explaining the past is not the same as predicting the future. A serious astrologer should therefore keep records. Write the prediction down. Record the data. Record the reasoning. And later compare the prediction with the actual outcome. Ask, what did I get right? What did I get wrong? Which planetary factor did I underestimate? Which factor did I exaggerate? Was the timing wrong? Was the event wrong? Was the interpretation too specific? This turns astrology into a process of research and continuous learning. Failure is data. A failed prediction is not something to hide. It is data. Suppose you predicted that Jupiter would produce financial expansion, but financial expansion did not occur. Go back to the horoscope. Perhaps Saturn was restricting the relevant house. Perhaps the period did not support Jupiter. Perhaps Jupiter's dispositor was weak. Perhaps the Nakshatra Lord changed the expression. Perhaps the event manifested in another Jupiterian area: education, children, travel, spirituality, or knowledge. Every incorrect prediction gives us an opportunity to refine our methodology. Science progresses partly by studying what does not work. Astrological research should have the same intellectual discipline. What should an astrologer say when wrong? Something very simple. My prediction did not materialize as expected. Let us examine why. There is nothing shameful about these words. In fact, admitting uncertainty can increase credibility. The real danger begins when an astrologer refuses to acknowledge mistakes, or changes the original predictions after the event, or invents explanations merely to protect their reputation. Astrology deserves better, and the people who trust astrologers deserve even better. Let us discuss 7 lessons from failed predictions. So what should we learn? Lesson 1. Never depend on a single planetary factor. Lesson 2. Look for convergence between periods, transit, natal, promise, and divisional charts. Lesson 3. Study nakshatras and their dispositors carefully. Lesson 4. Distinguish a planetary theme from a specific event. Lesson 5. Consider birth time accuracy before making highly precise prediction. Lesson 6. Respect human choice and real-world circumstances. Lesson 7. Document predictions and audit them afterwards. Because prediction without verification becomes opinion, and prediction followed by systematic review becomes research. Astrology must keep learning. Astrology has survived for thousands of years because generations of observers studied the relationship between celestial cycles and human experience. But tradition should never become an excuse to stop questioning. Every successful prediction teaches us something. Every unsuccessful prediction should teach us even more. The objective of astrology should never be to prove that the astrologer is always right. The objective should be to understand the patterns of time more accurately and to use that knowledge responsibly. So the next time an astrological prediction fails, don't simply ask, who was wrong? Ask, what did we learn? Because perhaps the future of astrology will not be built by astrologers who claim perfect accuracy. Perhaps it will be built by astrologers who are willing to test, document, question, refine, and learn. Study deeply, predict responsibly, and never stop learning. Specific public predictions about future events that did not occur. That includes astrology, psychics, prophets, and other certainty-based forecasts. It avoids singling out one field and reinforces your central ethical message. Certainty about the future should be approached with humility. Throughout this journey, we have examined predictions that failed. But perhaps failure is not the end of the investigation. Perhaps it is where investigation begins. A prediction that succeeds may strengthen our confidence, but a prediction that fails forces us to examine our assumptions. Was the astronomical data correct? Was the horoscope reliable? Were the planetary combinations interpreted consistently? Was the timing technique appropriate? Were contradictory indicators ignored? Did the astrologer see what the chart actually indicated, or what the astrologer expected to see? And when attempt to predict wars, elections, financial markets, earthquakes, or the destiny of nations, are we sometimes asking astrology to provide a degree of certainty that no predictive system can reasonably provide? These are difficult questions, but serious research requires difficult questions. Astrology does not become weaker when we acknowledge uncertainty. It becomes more intellectually responsible. We should document successful predictions, but we should document failed predictions too. We should test our methods, compare techniques, record results, challenge assumptions. And above all, resist the temptation to rewrite our explanations after the event has already occurred. Because the purpose of research should never be to prove that astrology is always right. The purpose should be to discover when it works, when it does not, why, and where its limits may lie. Perhaps astrology will never give humanity absolute certainty about tomorrow. But if we approach it with humility, discipline, and intellectual honesty, it may still teach us something profoundly valuable about patterns, cycles, and ourselves. So the next time a prediction fails, don't simply forget it. Write it down, study it, question it, and learn from it. Because sometimes the prediction that failed may teach us more than the prediction that came true. I'm Arun Tiwari. Thank you for joining me on this journey of inquiry. Until we meet again, keep questioning, keep researching, and keep learning. Namaskar.